right, so this will be a 2 or 3 part series answering the question, what is biblical love? The New Testament uses 2 Greek words to describe love. They're both translated love. The first is agape, the second is phileo. Some teachers say that there's a distinction, a special difference between the 2 words. Some say that agape is a really special kind of love, that it's like a godly or Christ-like love, self-sacrificing love that only God has, or only believers can have, right? That non-believers won't experience, until or unless they get saved, right? Unless God opens their hearts to it, whatever. Phileo, on the other hand, they say it's like a brotherly love, the love that a family member has for another family member. Philadelphia, city of brotherly love, that kind of stuff. So is there a difference between these 2 words, right? Is there actually a distinction? Greek scholars do not consider there to be a distinction. It's largely, it used to be a matter of debate. It's not really debated anymore. Some scholars even say it's irresponsible to distinguish between the 2 words. So there's a bit of a spectrum on that thought, ranging from there's no difference whatsoever, they're perfect synonyms or near perfect synonyms, to, on the other hand, saying that each word has a meaning and that they overlap. They overlap somewhere in the middle. They overlap a lot. How much do they overlap? Is it 100%, 50%? Who knows? So why do they have these differences in opinion, right? Why is there a spectrum rather than it being certain? Well, we have to remember that the Bible isn't the only book. The New Testament isn't the only book that we have that's written in Greek, in ancient Greek. There were plenty of other documents from before, during, and after the time the Bible was written that were written in the same language, right? So you can look at those other writings to get kind of a handle on what these Greek words mean, the same ones that are used in the New Testament and the Old Testament, actually, since the oldest copy of the Old Testament we have right now is actually in Greek, not Hebrew. But in the case of agape and phileo, right, some of the non-biblical writings use the words like they have these distinct meanings, right? And other authors and other writings use them like they're just exact synonyms, right? So really, since the Bible is just one of these this collection of Greek writings, obviously the most important one, but still just one collection among the Greek writings, we're not really asking, do agape and phileo have distinct meanings? What we're really asking is, do the biblical authors give agape and phileo distinct meanings? So does the Bible treat them differently, right? Because like I said, each of these writings might treat these words differently. So how does the Bible treat them? I'm going to be using the interlinear version a lot for this. If you don't know what that is, I made a video on that before. What Bible translation is best? I go into it a lot there, how to use it and stuff. Really good tool. All right, so first, is agape some special kind of divine, godly, Christ-like love? Is it a love that only believers can experience or truly have? All right, well, let's take a look at Luke chapter 6, verse 32. Jesus says, if you agape those who agape you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners agape those who agape them. John chapter 3, 19. And this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people agape the darkness rather than the light, because their works were evil. See, they agape the darkness. John chapter 12, verse 43, speaking to the Pharisees, Jesus says, for they agape the glory that comes from man rather than the glory that comes from God. So as we can see, agape love is not always like some positive, good, Christ-like, God-honoring love, right? The Pharisees agape the glory that man gave them, that men gave them, instead of what God gave them. So the Pharisees had agape love. The people agape the darkness rather than the light, right? They did not agape the light, they agape the darkness, right? That's not a good thing. That's not a Christ-like, godly thing, whatever. So that's that. Does agape love have a different meaning from phileo love, right? The family, allegedly brotherly love, or whatever. So reading from John chapter 21, verse 15 through 17, is the famous discussion between Jesus and Simon Peter. Start here in verse 15. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, feed my lambs. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he had said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything, you know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. All right, so what did Jesus ask Peter, right? He said, Peter, do you love me, right? How many times did he ask that same question, right? The same question. As verse 17 says, he asked Peter 3 times, right? So if you look in the interlinear, this is pretty interesting because what Jesus has actually asked him, the first time he says, Peter, do you agape? Peter, do you agape? And then Peter, do you phileo? See, he switches it. And yet the Bible itself says in the beginning of verse 17 that Jesus said the question 3 times. And then Peter is saddened because Jesus has asked him that question 3 times, right? But obviously, if agape and phileo are separate, distinct words, then Jesus has not asked the same question 3 times. The first 2 times he says agape, agape, and then the third time he says phileo. The only way those are the same questions is if the 2 words are the same, right? So there's more examples of this. You can compare like John chapter 14:23. That focuses on agape, right? If you agape God, he will agape you. And then compare that to John chapter 16, verse 27, which says exactly the same thing, but uses phileo instead. So it says, because you have phileo God, God phileos you, right? So for the sake of keeping the video short, I'm not going to go into detail on those. So the takeaway then, what are we supposed to take away from this? There's very little, if any, difference at all between agape and phileo. Greek scholars do not see any justification for making a significant distinction. If the Bible uses them in some special or distinct way, the only way we'll know is from the context. And that means they're not being used in some special or distinct way. It's just that the context is speaking of different kinds of love, from a theological standpoint. But the differences between the words agape and phileo are not part of that, right? You have to look at the context and see if in the specific context there's a specific or a special kind of love. So there is no such thing as agape love or phileo love, just biblical love. So what is that? Like I said, this is the first in the 2 or 3 part video series. I'll go into that next. So see you guys next time.